Good afternoon and welcome to WASA Distance Education. My name is Greg Weaver and this is ENG3C, Grade 11, College Prep English. I'd like to welcome everyone listening across the North today at home, your learning center, or on Bill Expressview. To call and join our class, you can call 1-800-465-7844 or 737-4017 or 2983 in the Sioux Lookout, Lac Seul, or Dryden areas. So I'd like to welcome everyone back today. This is our last class of the week. Remember, there's no classes tomorrow. What we're doing today is we're going to be starting with Unit 2 and looking at Lesson 6 today. Now, Unit 2 deals with short stories. So in each lesson, we're going to read a short story and look at a different part of what is a short story. Now, some of the work that we do in this lesson or in this whole unit will be used again in Unit 3. When we get to Unit 3, we will be looking at our course novel, which is To Kill a Mockingbird. We will continue to read until the end of Part 1. So we'll read one chapter or lesson to get to the end of chapter 11. Then the rest will be up to you to do. We may read little bits and pieces of the novel just to help clarify it, but you'll be responsible for reading most of it on your own. So you want to take the time now, if you have any extra time, try and read ahead in the novel. Read ahead, see what you can do in order to get ahead. That way you don't have as much reading to do in Unit 3. So we're starting off looking at Unit 2, Lesson 6 today. And what we're looking at is an introduction to short stories. So it says the short story is a genre that most writers do attempt, but that only some do well. The trick in writing short stories is to say a lot in a short space. And I see our first calls come in from Wunderman Lake. Who's there in Wunderman today?
Ramona.
Hello, Ramona. Good to hear you again. I haven't heard your voice in a little while. We're just starting Unit 2 today. So we just finished up lesson one, all of Unit 1 yesterday, and we're starting in looking at Unit 2. Now, if you have missed some classes, everything is available online, either on our website, which is nnec.on.ca, or it's available on YouTube. You can find the links through my own Facebook profile. I'm pretty sure that I had you as a friend on there. So you can find it through my YouTube, through my Facebook. You can find all the YouTube classes as well. So you can use those that get caught or answer any questions that you might have. So we are starting with Unit 2. Before we start, do you have any questions with Unit 1, Ramona? Okay, so if you do have any questions, be sure to let me know. And we'll do my sense. We're looking at Unit 2, Lesson 6. We're just starting right at page 2. We're just looking at what is a short story. And it's when you try and say a lot in a very short space. In a novel, a writer can wander to many locales and introduce many characters. The short story writer is challenged to convey a complex idea or complex characters in a very simple format in a very short space. Most short stories are no longer than 20 or 25 pages at the most. The ones that we're going to be reading in class during this unit are no longer than 8 pages. It is, I believe, is the longest one we're reading. So they're not long, but a lot happens in a very short time. So the stories you will read all concern themselves with the problem of the criminal. Some are written from the society's perspective, others from the criminals. But each one is unique. So in Unit 1, we looked at discrimination. That was our big theme, our big plot point was discrimination. That linked everything together. In this one, the idea of the criminal is what links everything together. So, what are some different elements of a short story? This is one of the key things you have to know in order to really be able to read, understand, and analyze a short story. So, the first thing is the plot. So, the plot is what actually happens in the short story. So, what are the events? Now, it all revolves around one central conflict. The conflict is a problem that exists between characters. The conflict does not necessarily result in violence. However, the conflict does create tension in the plot and it generates the interest for the reader. And there's 5 different types of conflict. They all revolve around the individual, around either a protagonist, an antagonist, or another character. But it's either between the person and him and another individual. So individual or person against person. So they have a problem with another character. Whether it is a physical problem, an emotional problem, a personality clash, whatever it is, it's between one individual and another individual. The next kind is known as individual versus him or herself. This is normally an internal conflict. So the problem that the character has with some aspect of themselves. So this can take the form if they are trying to decide what course of action to take. The biggest way to think of an individual versus him or herself is think back to old cartoons you may have watched. And you had the little angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. That's a good example of an individual versus him or herself conflict. They have 2 voices in their heads trying to figure out which one is going to win. Our next one is known as individual versus society. So that's when the person has some conflict or some problem with society in general, or one segment of society. This is where discrimination normally fits in with a short story. If they're being discriminated against, it's normally either because of who they are as an individual, whether they are First Nations, whether they're Asian, or they are a woman, they're a man, or against society, if looking at other cultural groups. So that's where that normally fits in with discrimination. Our fourth one is an individual versus a supernatural, or against some kind of fate, or they're fighting against God, they're fighting against some kind of thing that they don't want. And our final one is an individual versus nature. And the individual versus nature is when there's some kind of conflict in the natural natural world. So let's say someone's lost and they're trying to get back home, but they're stuck out in the bush. The conflict they would have would be against nature itself as they try to make it back home. If someone's in a plane crash and they're stuck, and they're trying to get back to civilization from the plane crash. That would be a nature conflict. So the point of the story then becomes solving the conflict. The plot develops along the plot graph, which is the standard formula for a short story. This is a same thing you could use in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird as well. It's applicable to both novels and short stories. So you see you have a graph there that starts flat, it goes up gradually, and then it drops off suddenly. So I'll give a second, I'll highlight this so it's hopefully a bit clearer. So we see it there, that is our graph. So we've seen numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So number 1 is the introduction. This quickly introduces the reader to the conflict, the characters, and the setting. Ramona, do you think that you could turn the radio down in the background there? So our second one is known as the rising action number 2. And that's when several events take place that create the tension and develop the conflict. So the first one tells you who are the characters, what's the setting, what's the first conflict. And that's normally very quickly developed in the short story because you don't have a lot of space to do it in. In To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, we're still not fully at what the conflict is, and we're at chapter 7. And short stories is done very, very quickly. The rising action is the events, the situations, kind of the meat or the things that happen that create tension and develop the conflict. Whatever the conflict you identify in the first part, this is where it's going to be developed. And this is where the author can create some suspense. You don't know how it's going to end, and more complications can arise. You have things happen that you don't expect to happen. The third part, that's the very top of that gradual upward going line, is known as the climax. And that's the highest point of action. It's also known as the turning point. And that's the point at which the conflict is solved. So that's when everything's resolved. Somehow everything comes to resolution. Everyone either goes away happy or goes away sad, but they do go away. Everything's resolved. And number 4, the really quick drop off there, is known as the falling action. And what that means is that corresponds to the action you just showed. So that's when everything gets resolved. All the loose ends get wrapped up, and everyone moves on, either happily or unhappily ever after, depending on what happens. So that's the first one. That's all the plot. That's one element of a short story. Our next is known as the setting. Now, the setting of a short story encompasses both time and place. So, sometimes the setting is incidental or it doesn't matter. So it can be placed anywhere. However, one can think of numerous examples where the setting becomes almost like another character. Think of historical stories, wilderness adventures, or science fiction. Each of these genres relies heavily on setting to make their stories effective. So, for example, the one that we're going to be reading later in this class is set in London, England, in the late 1800s. So that setting itself sends a big message. Our third element is known as character. So the characters in a short story tend to be very few in number so that the author can work on developing them as fully as possible. You want to know exactly what are their challenges, what are their successes, what are they having good, what are they really good at, what are they not so good at. You'll learn more about characters when we get to lesson 9. But here are a couple of terms you should be familiar with. One is known as protagonist versus antagonist. So the protagonist of the story is the hero. Now, this does not necessarily mean that the character is good, merely that he or she is the main character. This person is in conflict with the antagonist. So, protagonist is the main character. They may be a bad character, they may be evil, but they are the main character regardless. The person that they're fighting against or they're in conflict with is known as the antagonist. Another one is rounded versus flat characters. So rounded characters have numerous characteristics and play a significant role in the action. Flat characters are supporting players. They rarely serve a purpose in the plot, but rarely appear for long. So rounded characters are characters that you always see who are some of your main characters. Your protagonist and antagonist will be considered rounded characters. They have a lot to do with the story. Flat characters we'll talk about more after we've read the short story. Don't play a whole big... Are there. They play a little bit of a role, but they don't do a whole lot. And then we have what's known as the theme or the message. That's our fourth element of a short story. And the theme or the message is a difficult concept for many students to understand. Many people confuse the topic with the theme. Now, the topic is what the story is about. So someone asks you, "Oh, what was that? What's that movie about? What's that new movie about?" You told them, "Oh, it's about blank." That's what the topic is. The theme is what the story says about that topic. So, for example, common topics include love, friendship, war, loyalty, and there's a lot of others out there you can think of. Those are just 4 examples. So, well, it's about the love between a husband and wife that are separated for so long, all that. So for example, our topic could be loyalty. So our theme would be loyalty is the most important part of friendship. We could have another topic on war. And that could be something like some wars are justified. One way of making sure you're differentiating between the two is to notice that topics can normally be stated in one word. Oh, let's talk about it. Oh, it's about bliss. And themes are often written as statements. So next we have our little short story here. So for everyone to consider the following questions. What would you do if someone betrayed you in a relationship? The main character in the story you will read chose revenge. Why is revenge so popular in our society? As you're reading, focus on all the elements of plot that you've just read about. Who are the characters? What is the setting that's set in? So we're going to read a short story called The Case of Lady Sannox. Now, this is by an author by the name of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, if that name sounds familiar, that's because he is more famous for writing about Sherlock Holmes. He's the author that wrote all of the Sherlock Holmes stories. So if he sounds familiar, that's why. So he's from Scotland, and he was writing in the late 1800s. So that's what you want to keep in mind as we read through this. So it's called The Case of Lady Sannox. It'll probably take us about 10 or 15 minutes to read through it. It is a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages. That's one of our longer short stories we'll read. So follow along as I read. And if you have any questions, when you see you get to a bit of a paragraph break, you can ask me then. Or wait to the end of the short story and ask me then. Choice is up to you. Now, one thing you'll notice is at the very bottom, you'll see these little numbers here. I just highlighted them on Bridget so you can see it. It says confrères, and it says little number 1. If you scroll down here, you see number 1, it says brothers. So what these little numbers are, these are called little superscripts, and they're little footnotes. So those are words that you may not know what they mean. Because this was written back in the late 1800s, the English language has changed since then. Certain words are no longer used. They've fallen out of usage in English. And we've added new words to the language that people who were around in 1890 would have no clue what they are. For example, if you were to ask someone in 1890, what is the internet? They would have no clue. Making a type of fishing net. Or if you were to say that you had, if you were to say, oh, I'm LOLing at that, they would have no idea what that meant. English language is always evolving. So these words, you may know what they mean. That's what they're there for. So it says, the relationship between Douglas Stone and the notorious Lady Sannox were very well known both among the fashionable circles, to which she was a brilliant member, and the scientific bodies, which summoned among their most delicious confrères, or brothers. There was naturally, therefore, a widespread interest when it was announced one morning that the lady had absolutely forever taken the veil, or become a nun, and the world would see her no more. When, at the very tail of this rumor, there came the assurances that the celebrated operating surgeon, the man of steel nerves, had been found in the morning by his valet, seated on one side of his bed, smiling pleasantly upon the universe, with both legs jammed into one side of his breeches, and his great brain about as valuable as a cat full of porridge, the matter was strong enough to give quite a little thrill of interest to the folk who had never hoped that their jaded nerves were capable of such sensation. Douglas Stone was in his prime, was one of the most remarkable men in England. Most remarkable men in England. Indeed, he could hardly have been said to have ever reached his prime, for he was but 9 and 30, he was 39 at the time of this little incident. Those who knew him best were aware that as famous as he was a surgeon, he might have succeeded with even greater rapidity in any of a dozen other lines of life. He could have cut his way to fame as a soldier, struggled to it as an explorer, bullied for it in the courts, or built it out of stone and iron as an engineer. He was born to be great, for he could plan what another man dare not do, and he could do what another man dare not plan. In surgery, none could follow him. His nerve, his judgment, his intuition were things apart. Again and again, his knife cut away death, but grazed the very springs of life in doing so, until his assistants were as white as the patient. His energy, his audacity, his full-blooded self-confidence, does not the memory of them still linger to the south of Marylebone Road and the north of Oxford Street? His vices were as magnificent as his virtues, and infinitely more picturesque. Large as was his income, and it was the third largest of all professional men in London, it was far beneath the luxury of his living. Deep in his complex nature lay a rich vein of sensualism, at the sport of which he placed all the prizes of his life. The eye, the ear, the touch, the palate, all were his masters. The bouquet of old vintages, the scent of rare exotics, the curving tints of the daintiest potters of Europe, with these that the quick-running stream of gold was transformed. And then came his sudden mad passion for Lady Sannox. A single interview with two challenging glances and whispered words set him ablaze. She was the loveliest woman in London, and the only one for him. He was one of the most handsomest men in London, not the only one to her. She had a liking for new experiences, and was gracious to most men who wooed her. It may have been for cause, or may have been for effect, that Lady Sannox looked 50, though he was but 36. He was quiet, silent, neutral-tinted man, this lord, with thin lips and heavy eyelids. Much given to gardening and homes full of home-like habits. He had one time been fond of acting, and had even been to the theatre in London and put on its boards he'd seen first Miss Marion Dawson, to whom he'd offered his hand as title and a third of a country. Since his marriage to his early hobby had become distasteful to him. Even in private theatricals, it was no longer possible to persuade him exercise the talent which he'd so often showed that he possessed. He was happier with the spud and watering can among his orchids and chrysanthemums. It was quite the interesting problem, whether he was absolutely devoid of sense or miserably wanting in spirit. Did he know his lady's ways and condone them? Was he mere blind, doting fool? It was at a point to be discussed over teacups in snug little drawing rooms, or with the aid of a cigar in the bow windows of clubs. Bitter and plain were the comments among men among his conduct. There was one who had a good word to say for him, and he was the most silent member of the smoking room. He had seen him break in a horse at the university, and seemed to have left the impression upon his mind. But when Douglas Stone became the favorite of all doubts as to Lord Sannox's knowledge of ignorance was set forever. There's no subterfuge about Stone. Alright, and that's the definition right there. His high-handed, impetuous fashion, he set all caution and discretion at defiance. The scandal became notorious. A learned body imitated that his name and struck from the list of its vice presidents. Two friends implored him to consider his professional credit. He cursed them all three, and spent 40 guineas on a bangle to take with him to the lady. He was at her house every evening, and she drove in his carriage in the afternoons. There was not an attempt on either side to conceal their relations, but there came at last a little incident to interrupt them. It was a dismal winter's night, very cold and gusty, with the wind whooping in the chimneys and blustering against the window panes. A thin splatter of rain tinkled on the glass, with each fresh slew of the gale, drowning for an instant the dull gurgle and drip from the eaves. Douglas Stone had finished his dinner, and sat by his fire in the study, a glass of rich port upon the malachite, elbow or table at his elbow. As he raised it to his lips, he held it against the lamplight, and watched with the eye of a connoisseur the tiny scales of beeswing which flowed in its rich ruby depths. The fire, as it spurred up, threw fitful light upon his bald, clear-cut face, with its widely open gray eyes, its thick and yet firm lips, and the deep, square jaw which was something Roman in its strength and its animalism. He smiled from time to time as he nestled back in his luxurious chair. Indeed, he had a right to feel well pleased, for against the advice of 6 colleagues, he had performed an operation that day, of which only 2 cases were on record, and the result had been a brilliant beyond all expectation. No other man in London would have had the daring to plan, or the skill to execute such a heroic measure. But he had promised Lady Sannox to see her that evening, and was already 8:30. His hand was outstretched to the bell in order to carriage when he heard a dull thud of the knocker. An instant later, there was a light shuffling of feet in the hall, and the sharp closing of a door. "A patient to see you, sir, in the consulting room," said the butler. Sorry, I lost my spot there. "About himself? No, sir. I think he wants you to go out." "It's too late," cried Douglas Stone peevishly. "I won't go. This is his card, sir." The butler presented upon the gold slaver that had been given to his master by the wife of a prime minister. "Hamil Ali, Smyrna." The fellow's a Turk, I suppose." "Yes, sir. He seems to be came from abroad, and he's in a terrible way. Tut, tut, I have an engagement. I must go somewhere else. But I'll see him. Show him in here, please, Pym." A few moments later, the butler swung open the door and ushered in a small and decrepit man, who walked with a bent back and with a forward push of the face and blink of his eyes, which goes to the extreme short sight. His face was swarthy, and his hair and beard of the deepest black. In one hand he held a turban of white muslin striped with red, in the other a small chamois leather bag. "Good evening," said Douglas Stone, when the butler closed her eyes. "You speak English, I presume?" "Yes, sir. I'm from Asia Minor. I speak English when I speak slow." "You want me to go out, I understand?" "Yes, sir. I wanted very much you should see my wife." "I should come in the morning. I have an engagement that prevents me from seeing your wife tonight." The Turk's answer was a singular one. He pulled the string which closed the mouth of the chamois leather bag, and poured a flood of gold onto the table. "There are £100 there," he said, "and I promise you I'll have not take you an hour. I have a cab ready at the door." Douglas Stone glanced at his watch. An hour would not make it too late to visit Lady Sannox. He had been there later, and the fee was an extraordinarily high one, and he'd been pressed by his creditors lately, and he could not afford to let such a chance pass. He would go. "What's the case?" he asked. "Oh, it's a sad one. It's such a sad one. You have not perhaps heard of the daggers of the Elamites?" "Never." "They are an Eastern dagger of a great age and singular shape, with the hilt like we call a stirrup. I'm a curiosity dealer, you understand, and that's why I come to England back from Smyrna, but next week I go back once more. Many things I bought with me, and I have few things left, but one of them, to my sorrow, is one of these daggers." "You will remember that I have an appointment, sir," said the surgeon, with some irritation. "Pray confine yourself to necessary details." "You will see that it is necessary. Today my wife fell down the faint in the room, which I keep my word, and she cut her lower lip upon this cursed dagger of the Elamites." "I see, and you wish me to address the wound?" "No, sir, it's worse than that." "What is it then?" "These daggers are poisoned." "Poisoned?" Yes, and there's no man, east or west, who can tell what is the poison and what the cure. But the law is I know, for my father was in this trade before me. We had much to do with these poison weapons. What are the symptoms? Deep sleep and death in 30 hours. So there's no cure. Why would you pay me this considerable fee? No drug can cure, but the knife may. And how? The poison is slow absorption. It remains for hours in the wound. Watching them might cleanse it, no more than snake bite. It's too subtle and too deadly. Excision of the wound, then? That is it. It would be a finger, take the finger off, so my father always said. But think of where the wound is, and is it my wife? It's dreadful. Familiarity to some grim matters may take the final edge from a man's sympathy. To Douglas Stone, this was already an interesting case. He brushed aside that is relevant, the feeble objection of the husband. Appears to be that or nothing, he said brusquely. It's better to lose a lip than a life. Ah, yes, I know you see that way. Well, it is. It is Kismet, or the will of Allah. It must be faced. I have the cab, and you'll come with me and do this thing. Douglas Stone took from his drawer of bursaries, and that's instruments, surgical instruments, and placed a roll bandage and a compress of lint in his pocket. He must waste no time with his sea lace Xanax. I'm ready, he said, pulling his overcoat. Will you take a glass of wine before I go out in this cold air? There shrank away, the protesting hand upraised. Forget that I'm a Mussulman. I'm a true follower of the Prophet, he said. But tell me, is this bottle of green glass we haven't placed in your pocket? It's chloroform. It's also forbidden to us. It is a spirit, and you make no such use of these things. What? You allow your wife to go through such an operation without an anesthetic? She felt nothing, poor soul. Deep sleep has already come on her, which is the first working of the poison. And I have given her all of our Smyrna opium. Come, sir, for already an hour has passed. As they stepped out into the darkness, a sheet of rain was driven upon their faces, and the hall lamp, which dangled from the arm of a marble cadran, went out with a puff. Pym the butler pushed the heavy door to, straining hard with his shoulder against the wind, while the two men groped their way towards the yellow glare which showed where the cab was waiting. An instant later, they were rounding about on the journey. Is it far? Asked Douglas Stone. Oh, no, we have a little quiet place off the Euston Road. The surgeon pressed the spring of his repeater. Listen to the little tings which told him the hour. It was 9:15. He had calculated the distance of short time it would take for Napoleon's trillion operation. He reached Lake Sax by 10 o'clock. Through the fogged window, he saw the blurred glass lamps dancing past, with the occasional broader glare of a shop front. The rain was pelting and rattling upon the leathern top of the carriage, and the wheels washed as they rolled through puddle and mud. Opposite to him was the white headgear of his companion gleamed faintly through his obscurity. The physician felt in his pockets and arranged his needles, his ligatures, and safety pins so that no time he wasted when they arrived. He chafed with impatience and drummed the foot upon the floor. But the cab slowed down at last and pulled up. In an instant, Douglas Stone was out, and the Smyrna merchant's toe was at his very heel. You can wait, he said to the driver. It was a mean-looking house in a narrow and sordid street. The surgeon, who knew his London well, cast a swift glance into the shadows. There was nothing distinctive, no shop, no movement, nothing but a double line of dull, flat-faced houses, a double stretch of wet flagstones which gleamed in the lamplight, and a double rush of water in the gutters that swirled and gurgled towards the sewer gratings. The door which faced them was blotched and discolored, with a faint light in the fan pan above it, also to show the dust and grime which covered it. But in one of the bedrooms there was a dull yellow glimmer. The merchant knocked loudly, and as he turned the dark face towards the light, Douglas Stone could see it was contracted with anxiety. A bolt was drawn, and an elderly woman with a taper stood in the doorway, shielding the thin flame with her gnarled hands. Is all well? Grasped the merchant. She is as you left her, sir. She has not spoken? No, she's in a deep sleep. The merchant closed the door, and Douglas Stone walked down the narrow passage, glancing around him in some surprise as he did so. There was no oilcloth, no mat, no hat rack. Deep gray dust and heavy festoons of cobwebs met his eyes everywhere. Following the old woman up the winding stair, his firm footfalls echoed harshly through the silent house. There was no carpet. The bedroom on the second floor was landing. Douglas Stone followed the old nurse into it, while the merchant at his heels. Here, at least, there was furniture, and spare the floor was littered corner piled with Turkish cabinets, inlaid tables, quilted chainmail, strange pipes, and grotesque weapons. A single small lamp stood upon a bracket in the wall. Douglas Stone took it down, picking his way along the lumber, walking over to a couch in the corner, which lay a woman dressed in the Turkish fashion, with the yashmak and veil. The lower part of her face was exposed. The surgeon saw a jagged cut which zigzagged along the border of the underlip. You forgive the yashmak, Cedric. You know our views about women in the East. But the surgeon was no longer thinking about the yashmak. This was no longer a case. It was no woman to him, it was a case. He stooped and examined the wound very carefully. There are no signs of irritation, said he. You might do the operation until local symptoms develop. Husband wrung his hands in uncontrollable agitation. Oh, sir, he cried, do not trifle. You do not know. It's deadly, I know, and I give you my assurance that an operation is absolutely necessary. Only the knife can save her. And I'm inclined to wait, said Douglas Stone. That's enough, cried Turk angrily. Every minute is important, and I cannot stand and see my wife allowed to sink. One minute to give me my thanks for having come, and too late to call some other surgeon before it's too late. Douglas Stone hesitated. To refund that £100 was no pleasant matter. But of course he left the case he must turn the money. If the woman was right and the woman died, his position before a coroner might be an embarrassing one. You have personal experience with poison? I have. And you assure me the operation is needful. I swear by all I hold sacred. The disfigurement will be frightful. I understand how the mouth will not be a pretty one to kiss. And that is where we'll end for now. We'll pick this up again on Monday, just because we're out of time. If you want to finish reading this short story on the weekend, you can. If not, we'll pick it up there. It'll take us maybe 10 minutes to finish it up. And then we'll work through key question 7 and chapter 7 of our novel before we get into our next short story as well. And that is where we'll end for today. So I'll talk to everyone again on Monday. Any questions, let me know. Call me, email, text me, or Facebook me. I'll talk to everyone again on Monday. Till then, have a good weekend, miigwech, and bye for now.